"Whoever she is," the Duke of Ivor said very low, "she is asleep in the one chair in England no living soul is permitted to touch." The words fell into the study like ice into a still glass, and the two footmen at the door went rigid as fence posts. Neither dared answer. It was 2 hours past midnight. The fire had burned down to a red seam of embers, and there, curled in the great wing-backed chair beside the hearth, his mother's chair, the chair he had not let a servant so much as dust in 7 years. A young woman slept with her cheek against her own wrist, and a smear of beeswax polish still darkening her thumb. Uriah, Duke of Ivermore, did not move for a long moment. He was a tall man, broad through the shoulder, with a face that most of the county described in whispers as carved and born a hard, a handsome, unforgiving face, the brows drawn, the mouth set in a line that had frightened cabinet ministers and reduced ambitious mothers to silence at their own dinner tables. He had been called the Cold Duke so often that he no longer troubled to resent it. Men who are feared are rarely disturbed, and Uriah had spent a good part of his life arranging to be undisturbed, which is another way of saying alone. "Your Grace," ventured the elder footman at last, Barrow, who had the courage of long service. "It is one of the girls brought up from the village to help ready the north rooms for your aunt's arrival. I expect she was set to the polishing and the hour ran away with her." "I did not ask who set her to it." The Duke's eyes had not left the sleeping figure. "I asked who she is." "Cardugan, your Grace. Marisol Cardugan. The apothecary's, that is the late apothecary's daughter from Hollowmere. She comes up by the day. The apothecary's daughter. Not even a proper servant of the house, then. A village girl hired for a week by the housekeeper, the sort of person a duke was never meant to know by name, the sort who was supposed to move through the great cold rooms of Avermore like weather, present and unremarked and gone by morning. And she had fallen asleep in his mother's chair. He knew Hollowmere well enough to place her, though he had never troubled to learn its people. It sat in the low ground below the park wall, a huddle of thatch and smoke where the rents came from and the fevers came out of, and its apothecary. He remembered the man now dimly, a stooped and gentle figure who had once sent up a tincture for the old Duchess's car and refused payment for it, had been the only soul in 3 parishes to look the Cold Duke in the eye without flinching. So the trait ran in the blood then. The father had done it standing, the daughter had done it lying down. He was not certain which he found the more remarkable. He ought to have been angry. He was aware, in a distant way, that the anger was owed, that it was expected of him, that Barrow was even now bracing for the storm as a man braces for a blow he has felt before. The Duke of Ivermore in a temper was a memorable thing, but the anger would not come. What came instead, unbidden and unwelcome, was the plain sight of her, the exhaustion in the slack of her hand, the shadows beneath her eyes that no amount of youth had smoothed away, the mended cuff at her wrist turned carefully inward so the mend would not show. She had polished until she dropped. She had sat down in the warmth for one moment, one stolen moment out of a day that had plainly held too many hours of labour, and the warmth had taken her the way it takes the very tired, all at once and without mercy. "Leave us," he said. Barrow blinked. "Your Grace, shall I have Mrs. Peel wake her and see her? Leave us. Both of you, close the door." They went. They were glad to go. He could see that too. The door met its frame with a soft, final click, and the Duke of Ivermore was left alone in his study at 2 in the morning with a stranger asleep in the chair where his mother had died. That was the reason, if anyone had ever dared ask him for one, and no one had for years. The chair had been hers. The Duchess of Ivermore, his mother, had spent the last winter of her life in it, wrapped in shawls, watching the fire and asking him again and again with the terrible patience of the dying, to promise her he would not shut the world out after she was gone. He had promised. He had been 33 then, and he had meant it, and he had broken the promise before the first spring was out. It had been easier than keeping it. Grief had taught him that a closed door kept out pain along with everything else, and by the time he understood the bargain he had made, that a man who admits no sorrow admits no joy either, that the two come through the same door or not at all, the habit had set like mortar. He had grown cold because cold did not hurt, and he had kept the chair empty because to see anyone else sit in it was more than he could stand. 7 years. And now a village girl with polish on her thumb had done in her sleep what half the peerage would not have dared awake. He crossed the room slowly, He meant, he told himself, to wake her, to speak the cold word that would send her scrambling out into the night, and to have the chair to himself again, and the silence, and the ordinary armor of a life he had arranged so carefully. But he stopped a pace short of her, and he did not speak, because up close she was younger than he had thought, and more tired, and there was upon her sleeping face an expression he had not seen on a human face in a very long time. It was peace. Not the smooth vacancy of a girl with nothing to trouble her. He could read hardship on her plainly enough, in her hands, in the plain stuff of her dress, in the very fact that she was here scrubbing another man's floors at midnight, but peace despite it. As though even in exhaustion she had somewhere within her a place that was warm and safe, and had gone there. The Duke of Ivermore, who had every luxury the kingdom could furnish and had not slept a whole night through in years, stood over a poor girl in a mended dress and felt, absurdly, that she possessed something he did not. The fire settled with a small collapse of embers. She stirred. He should have stepped back. He did not. And so it was that when Murasol Cardogan's eyes opened, grey eyes, clear even blurred with sleep, the first thing they found was the terrible, storied, carved face of the Duke of Ivermore bent above her in the dying firelight. And she came awake all at once with a small caught breath, and was on her feet before she was fully conscious of standing, so that they were suddenly very close, and she had to tip her head back to look at him. For an instant she did not know where she was. He watched it come to her, the room, the hour, the chair behind her, the man in front of her. He watched the colour drain from her face and then flood back into it. And he waited with a weary familiar certainty for what always came next, the flutter, the stammering, the pretty helpless terror, the my lord, I beg your pardon, that would let him despise her comfortably and be done. It did not come. I fell asleep, she said. Her voice was low and steady, if not quite even. In your chair. I am very sorry, your grace. There is no excuse worth your hearing, and I will not waste your patience inventing one. He was so unprepared for plainness that he had no answer ready. I ought to have gone home an hour past, she went on. She had drawn herself up. Her chin was level, only her hands, pressed flat against her skirts, betrayed her. I sat down to rest my feet, and I meant it to be a moment. It was wrong of me. It is a beautiful chair, and I had no business in it, and I am sorrier for that than for the sleeping, because— She stopped herself, because, the Duke said. She looked at him. Something moved behind the grey eyes, a decision, he thought, to tell the truth to a man who could have her turned out into the dark for it. Because it is plain no one has sat in it in a very long while, she said quietly. The dust was thick as felt when I came to it. A chair like that, kept so, is kept for someone. I sat in a grief that wasn't mine, and I am ashamed of it. The silence that followed was of a kind the Duke of Ivermore had not experienced in 7 years. It was not the silence of a room emptied by his temper, nor the careful hush of servants stepping round him, nor the vast cold quiet of a house he had made into a mausoleum for one. It was the silence of having been seen, plainly, accurately, and without the smallest flinch, by a person who owed him nothing and wanted nothing, and had merely, in her tiredness and her honesty, looked at a dusty chair and understood it. He found that his own hands were not quite steady, and he clasped them behind his back so that she should not see. He was a man accustomed to holding the whole of a conversation in his grip, to steering it where he pleased and ending it when he chose, and he found, with a curious vertiginous feeling, that he held nothing here at all. She had disarmed him not with cleverness but with the simple refusal to perform. Every other soul who came before him wore a face made for him, flattery, or fear, or the smooth ambition that hid behind both, and he had grown so used to those faces that he had forgotten there were people underneath. Here was a person with no face on at all, standing tired and honest in the ruin of his composure. You are the apothecary's daughter, he said, because it was the only footing he could find. From Hollowmere. I am, your grace. A flicker of surprise that he knew it. He is dead. This last February. She said it without self-pity, the way she said everything, a fact laid down between them. Of the winter fever, the same that took half the Low Street. He would have doctored them all for nothing if we'd let him, and near enough did. When he died the shop went to his debts, and my mother and I to the parish's mercy, which is thin. So I come up to the great houses when there is work, and there is not always work, and tonight there was, and I am keeping your grace from his sleep with the whole sad history of it when you asked me a simple question." She stopped. "Forgive me. I talk when I am frightened. I had rather you knew it was fright than thought me forward." "You do not seem frightened," he said. "I am terrified," said Marisol Cardogan, "of you specifically, your grace, and have been since I passed under the gate. They tell fearful tales of the Duke of Ivermore in the village. He ought, by every rule of his life, to have found that insolent. Instead, something happened in his chest that had not happened in longer than he could reckon. A loosening, a warmth, the ghost of a thing he had thought dead. It took him a moment to name it. It was the wish to laugh. "Do they?" he said. "They say you turned a bishop from your door in the rain. They say you have not smiled since the old Duchess died, and that the fish in your ponds are frightened of you." A little desperate honesty had taken hold of her now. He could see her hearing her own words and being unable to stop them. "They say, forgive me, that your heart a cult called grace, and I sat down at it because I was tired, and I found it was only cold because no one had been let near enough to lay a fire in it, and I am going to be quiet now before I say something that has me put out on the road." The fire, as if in answer, gave up its last small flame and left them chiefly in the dark, only the red of the embers on her face and his. "The bishop," said the Duke of Ivermore after a while, "was a fool and a hypocrite and deserved the rain. The fish I cannot speak for." He heard his own voice as though from a distance, heard the unfamiliar thing in it, the thing that was almost gentleness, and did not know what to do with it. "You will not be put out on the road." She let out a breath that trembled at the end of it. "It is 2 hours past midnight," he went on, and the practical words steadied him, gave him something to stand upon. "Hollowmere is 4 miles by the low road, and the low road floods after rain, and it rained at dusk. You cannot walk it tonight. I have walked it in worse, your grace, truly. I am stronger than I look, and the moon is. You cannot walk it tonight," he said again, and this time it was not a duke commanding a servant. It was something else, and they both heard the difference, and it disconcerted them both. He turned from her, needing suddenly not to be looked at, and went to the bell pull by the mantel and rang it, and stood with his hand upon the cold marble and his back to her, while somewhere below a bell woke a sleeping house. "Mrs. Peel will see you to a room in the north wing," he said to the fire. "You will sleep in a bed, not a chair, and you will eat before you go, and in the morning the cart that goes down for the fish will carry you to your mother's door. You will tell her." He stopped. He did not know what she was to tell her mother. He did not know why his heart was beating as though he had run a distance. "You will tell her that her daughter was not turned out onto the road by the Duke of Ivermore, whatever the village says of me." There was a silence behind him. Then, very softly, "Why?" He did not turn. "Why what? Why are you kind to me, your grace, when it costs you plainly so much to be? For it does. I can see it costs you. You are being kind the way a man walks on a leg that has been long broken." He heard her take a step toward him and stop. "I sat in your chair. I said things I had no right to say. By every tale they tell of you, I should be halfway down the drive in tears. And instead you are ordering me a bed and a breakfast and worrying over the low road flooding, and I do not understand it. And I have learned that the things I do not understand are usually the things that undo me later. So I ask, why?" The Duke of Ivermore stood with his hand on the mantel where his mother's hand had rested, and outside the wind moved in the old elms, and the honest question hung in the dark and would not be dismissed. He could have dismissed her. He was very good at dismissal. It was nearly the whole of his craft. One cold word and she would be gone, and the chair would be empty again, and the house would close over the disturbance of her like water over a stone. He found he did not want the water to close. "Because," he said at last, and it was the truest thing he had said aloud in 7 years, and it frightened him more than any tale the village told of him could have frightened her, "you fell asleep in that chair, and you are the first person in a very long time to look happy in it. And I discover that I would rather learn how you managed it than have my study back." He heard the door open behind them, and Mrs. Peel's voice, thick with sleep and scandalized surprise. He heard Marisol Cardogan draw one more of those unsteady breaths. But he did not turn round, not yet, because his eyes were unaccountably stinging, and a Duke of Ivermore did not weep in front of the housekeeper and the apothecary's daughter at 2 in the morning over an empty chair. "Take Miss Cardogan to the blue room," he said instead, and his voice was steady, and only he knew what it cost. "See that she is warm, and Mrs. Peel, have the chair by the fire cleaned properly in the morning. It has been let go too long." When at last he turned, the housekeeper was staring at him as though he had spoken in tongues. But the girl, the poor, tired, plain-spoken girl who had wandered into the one forbidden place in his shuttered life, and sleeping, cracked a door he had sworn would never open again. The girl was looking at him with those clear grey eyes, and she was not afraid anymore, and that, he understood with a strange lurch of the heart as he watched her drop the smallest of curtsies and go, was going to be the ruin or the making of him, and he did not yet know which. And for the first time in 7 years he found that he wanted, very badly, to find out. She did not fly to her feet the way the others always did. That was the first thing Uriah, Duke of Ivermore, marked about the young woman standing before his cold hearth in the grey of that impossible morning. That she rose slowly from his own great chair, with the stiff carefulness of one whose body had been too long without proper rest, and that she did not fling herself into apology as though her life hung upon his mercy. She smoothed the front of her plain grey gown with 2 flat palms, drew a breath he could see her steady, and lifted her eyes to his as if she meant to answer for herself and no one else. "I fell asleep, Your Grace," she said, "in your chair. I have no defence to offer that would make it less than it is." He had expected weeping. He had expected the pretty, practised collapse he had seen 100 times in the drawing-rooms of finer houses, the trembling lip, the hand pressed to the heart, the swift calculation behind the tears of what advantage might be wrung from a great man's displeasure. He had lived long enough among such performances that he no longer troubled to distinguish one from another. 6 years passed, a woman with a face like a June morning had wept exactly so before him, and had married his cousin for the older title inside the month, and Uriah had learned then, once and thoroughly, that a woman's softness was a currency spent on rank. He had not forgotten the lesson. He had built the whole cold architecture of himself upon it. But this one did not weep. She only stood pale and plain and quite composed, in the wreck of a mistake could ruin her, and told him the bald truth of it as though truth were the only coin she carried. "You know whose chair that is," he said. His voice, they told him below stairs, could quiet a room of 30. It did not appear to move her above a flinch. "I do now, Your Grace. I did not, when I sat." The candle had gone out. "I had been carrying linen since before the church bells, and I sat only to rest my feet a moment, and the moment she stopped. She would not, he saw, dress the thing up. The moment became the whole night. I am sorry for it. I will gather my baskets and go. Your name?" "Marisol Cardogan." A small pause. "I am one of the seamstresses brought up from the village for the mending, sir. For the ball. There is a great deal of mending before a ball. A seamstress. Not even a housemaid with a place secured, but one of the temporary women by the dozen, and turned off again the moment the last hem was let down. The sort of person who passed through Avermore Hall, unseen, unnamed, and unremembered. He had perhaps 400 souls under his roofs and lands, and he could not have told the colour of the hair of a single seamstress among them. Yet here was one who had slept the night through in the Duke of Ivermore's own chair, in the Duke of Ivermore's own private chambers, and who now proposed with perfect gravity to gather her baskets and go. The absurdity of it moved something in him that had not moved in a long while. It was very nearly, though he would not have named it so, the beginning of a laugh. He crossed to the window instead and drew the curtain, and let the thin light fall across the room so that he might see her the better. She did not shrink from the looking. She was not beautiful in the manner the drawing-rooms prized, no bloom, no dimple, no artful curl at the temple. She was tired, and her hands were reddened at the knuckles from her work, and there was a faint crease pressed into her cheek where it had lain against the worn brocade of his chair through the long dark hours. But she held herself straight, and she met his eye, and there was in the plain set of her face a dignity that no drawing-room he knew had ever managed to purchase. "You are not afraid of me," he observed. "I am a great deal afraid of you, Your Grace," she answered at once. "Only I have found that being afraid and being untruthful are two separate things, and a body may do the one without the other." She bent then and took up the handle of a great wicker basket heaped with folded linen, and the effort of it showed briefly in her face. "If you will permit me. They will be looking for me in the sewing room, and it will go the worse for me the longer I am gone." "It will go the worse for you regardless," he said. She straightened. She understood him. He watched the understanding arrive in her eyes and watched her decline, again, to weep at it. "Yes," she said quietly, "I know that it will." Before he could answer, the door opened without a knock. It was a thing that never happened. No one at Ivilmore entered upon the Duke without a knock and a summons. The household had been schooled to his solitude for 6 years and had learned it as they learned scripture. But the door swung, and into the doorway came Lady Audeley's Danforth in a morning gown the colour of crushed apricots. One gloved hand already lifted in some airy remark to the mind her and stopped, and took in the room and the seamstress, and the basket, and the unmade great chair, with a pair of pale eyes that travelled the whole scene once and then a second slower time. "Your Grace," she breathed. "Forgive me, the door was ajar, and I thought only to bid you good morning before the others were down." But her gaze had fastened upon Marisol, and a small, delighted, terrible smile was gathering at the corners of her mouth. "But you are not alone." Lady Audeley's was the niece of the Countess who had brought half the county's marriageable daughters to Ivilmore under the pretence of the coming ball, and she was of all of them the one who had pursued him most steadily and with the greatest art. She had a way of arranging herself near him in doorways. She had a laugh she kept for his jokes that she kept for no one else's. She flattered him with a skill so polished that he had almost come to find it restful, the way one may find a well-oiled hinge restful, knowing exactly which way it will turn and how far and to what purpose. He knew precisely what she wanted of him. He had never once wondered what she thought, because he had never once believed she thought anything she had not first calculated the effect of saying. She was thinking now, and he could see every wheel of it turn. "This woman," Lady Audeley said, and let the word hang, "was here." "All the night?" She turned to him with an expression of the most tender concern. "Your Grace, I say nothing you must not imagine I would ever, but you will know better than I how the house will talk. A seamstress. In your very chambers. From dark until light." She pressed her glove to her lips as though to hold in a distress too great for speech. Oh, the poor creature. Whatever will become of her? There it was. It was as neat a piece of work as he had ever watched performed, the ruin wrapped in pity, the knife offered handle first with a curtsy. Marisol Cardigan was already ruined. A seamstress found at dawn in a duke's rooms did not keep her character, nor her place, nor her hope of another. And Lady Audeley's, having discovered the ruin, would be its most gentle and grieving herald, and would carry the tale down to breakfast on a silver tray of size, and would stand beside him in the wreckage looking, by contrast, so very safe, so very suitable. So very much the sort of woman a careful man might turn to. He waited for Marisol to plead. It was the moment for it, the moment when the trapped thing must throw itself upon the powerful and beg. He had seen it done. He had, God help him, come to expect it as the natural close of any scene in which he held all the cards. Marisol set her basket down again. She looked at Lady Audeley's, not with hatred, not with fear, but with a plain, level attention, as one might look at a strange weather rolling in. "I fell asleep in the Duke's chair by mistake, my lady," she said. "The Duke was not here. I did not know it was his chair. When I woke this morning, his Grace had come, and he found me, and I told him the truth of it, which is the same truth I am telling you. There is no other tale in it, though I do not doubt one could be made." She inclined her head quite steadily. "I would not have a lady trouble her breakfast on my account. I am nobody. It will be forgotten by Michaelmas." "Oh, my dear," said Lady Audeley, with a soft, sorrowing little laugh, "you cannot truly be so simple. Nothing is ever forgotten. That is the whole cruelty of the world." She turned her lovely, mournful face to the Duke. "Your Grace must do something. The kindest thing, surely, would be to send her home quietly, this very hour, before the servants' hall, before it spreads past mending. Send her home. Turn her off. Bury the accident in the girl's disgrace and let high-born ladies stay, unspotted, at their tea." And Uriah, Duke of Ivilmore, found that he did not want to. It surprised him, the wanting, or rather the not wanting, the flat and sudden refusal that rose in him at the picture Lady Audeley painted so prettily. He had spent 6 years learning to want nothing at all, which was a great deal safer than wanting the wrong thing, and here in the space of a single morning a tired seamstress with reddened knuckles had made him want, quite fiercely, that a lie should not be permitted to walk out of his rooms wearing the clothes of a kindness. "The chair," he said, "is mine, and I say who sits in it." Both women turned to him. Lady Odalis's smile did not falter. She had a great deal of practice at not faltering, but something behind it went still and watchful. "Miss Cadogan is here," he went on, unhurried, "because I keep no fires in this room. I dislike the heat. The household knows it and gives the room a wide berth, and so a weary woman found it dark and empty and used it as any weary body would. That is the beginning and the middle and the end of the matter. If any tongue in this house should render it otherwise—" He let his eyes rest, for a single unhurried moment, upon Lady Odalis. "I shall want to know whose tongue, and I shall remember that I wanted to know. My people do not gossip about what happens beneath my roof. They will not begin today." The silence that followed was very complete. "Of course, Your Grace," said Lady Odalis at last, and dropped a curtsy of exquisite depth. "How wise, how very like you. I only thought of the poor girl's good." She gathered her apricot skirts. "I shall say not a word, you may be quite easy, and I shall see to it that no one else does either. You may rely upon me." She smiled once more, brilliantly, and withdrew, and the maid behind her withdrew with her. And the door closed, and Uriah knew perfectly well that the tale would be halfway down the great stair before the second bell. Only now it would be told in whispers of how nobly the Duke had protected the wretched creature, which served her cause no better, and Lady Odalis's a great deal, and cost the lady nothing at all. He had bought Marisol Cadogan an hour, perhaps not even that. She seemed to know it. She stood a moment looking at the closed door, and then she looked at him, and to his considerable astonishment there was something in her face that was very nearly amusement. A rueful, weary, honest thing, the look of a person who has watched a card-sharp deal from the bottom and has not the standing to name it aloud. "You need not have done that, Your Grace," she said. "It will make no difference to the end of it, and it may cost you something with the lady. She had her heart set on a use for me. I am aware of what the lady had set her heart on. Then you will know I am not worth the setting against of it." She said it without a scrap of self-pity, as a plain accountant of her own worth in the market she lived in. A great man ought not spend his weight on a light thing. "I have my 2 hands and my needle. I will find another house." "You told her you were nobody," he said. It came out of him before he had decided to say it. Marisol paused. "I am Your Grace." "You did not plead," he said. "You did not weep. She offered you the whole of your ruined gift wrapped, and you thanked her and declined to spoil her breakfast." He was aware distantly that he was standing too near her now, that he had crossed half the cold room without marking the crossing, and that he was studying her tired, plain face with an attention he had not paid to anything living in longer than he cared to reckon. "Why did you not plead? It was your one chance of me. Every soul in this house would have pleaded." She considered the question as though it deserved considering, which he realized was itself a thing no one had done in his presence in years. They answered him quickly, to please, and she answered him slowly, to be true. "Because pleading is a kind of lie, Your Grace," she said. "It says a thing is more than it is, or asks a person to be more than he means to be, only to move him. I told you I fell asleep in a chair. That is the whole size of it, and if the whole size of it is not enough to save me, then no crying will make it larger, and I would rather go out of your rooms with the truth than stay in them on a falsehood." She bent once more to her basket. This time he did not stop her. "You have been kinder than the case deserved. I will remember it of you, whatever comes." She lifted the basket and the linen shifted, and from the top of it slid a single folded thing that fell to the floor between them, a man's evening cravat, snowy and fine, half-mended, one end pinned with a paper of pins. She caught her breath and stooped for it, and he stooped in the same instant, and their hands came down together upon the fallen linen so that his fingers closed over hers against the cold floor. She went perfectly still. So did he. For the length of a held breath, the Duke of Ivermore knelt upon his own hearthstone with the reddened, clever, work-roughened hand of a village seamstress caught warm beneath his own, and he did not draw back, and neither did she. and the grey morning light lay quiet across the two of them and the fallen cravat and the whole preposterous ruin of the thing. Then she slid her hand free, gently, without hurry, without the least performance of confusion, and rose and settled the cravat back among the rest, and stood with her basket on her hip. "That is yours, I think," she said a little unevenly, the first uneven thing she had said. "The mending. I have had your linen in my lap all this fortnight and never once thought whose neck it went about. Odd that. To know a man's shirts so well and his face not at all. You know my face now?" Yes, I do. She looked at it. "It is not so cold as they say below stairs, your grace. They will be sorry to hear it." And she curtsied, a plain, honest bob, nothing like Lady Odalis's plunging art, and carried his half-mended linen out of the room, and the door shut behind her, and Uriah, Duke of Ivermore, remained kneeling a moment longer upon his own cold hearth than there was any reason on earth to remain, looking at the place on the floor where her hand had been. He rose at last. He went to the window and stood a long while with the curtain in his hand, watching the grey lawns and the mist standing in the hollows and the first of the servants crossing the stable yard with their lanterns still lit against the dawn, and found that he could not, whatever he turned his mind, stop the tired plain face from rising up before it, the level eyes, the reddened knuckles, the crease pressed into her cheek by his own chair, the impossible dignity of a woman who owned nothing and would not, for all the world, be moved to a lie. He thought of the 6 years he had spent teaching every soul about him that the surest road to his contempt was to want something of him and dress the wanting as devotion. He thought of how quickly, how expertly Lady Odalis had reached for the girl's ruin as a rung to climb. And he thought of the seamstress declining, with the gravest courtesy, to spoil a lady's breakfast on her own account, and he found that the two pictures would not sit together in his chest without a great and unfamiliar disturbance as of some long-frozen thing beginning, against its settled habit, to shift. He had spent 6 years making himself a man who could not be reached. He had been reached, and by a seamstress, and by an accident, in the space of a single grey hour. And the worst of it, the thing that made him let the curtain fall and stand very still in the middle of the cold room, was that he already knew he would find some reason, before the day was out, to see her again. 3 days later, the peace of Ivermore ended as it always ended, with the sound of carriage wheels on the gravel and his aunt's voice arriving before his aunt did. Lady Honoria Vane had been descending upon her nephew twice a year for the whole of his adult life, and she descended the way weather descends, without permission and without apology, filling every room she entered before she had properly walked into it. The Duke stood on the steps in the grey noon light and watched the great travelling roll up beneath the elms, and he schooled his face into the carved indifference the county knew, and he thought before he could stop himself from thinking it, that he had not troubled to school his face at all, 3 nights running, in the presence of a girl in a mended dress. The observation displeased him. He put it away. Uriah. His aunt came up the steps in a rustle of grey silk and old authority, presenting her cheek to be kissed and inspecting him over the top of her spectacles as she did it. "You are thinner. You are pale. You live in this barn like a ghost that has lost interest in haunting. I have said it before, and I shall go on saying it until one of us is dead. You are welcome, aunt," he said, as ever. "I am not welcome, I am tolerated, which in this house is the same thing and a good deal more than most receive." She had already turned to gesture behind her, to the second, lighter carriage drawing up in the first one's wake. "I have brought company, since you keep none. You may thank me at your leisure. Mrs. Danforth you will recall. No, you will not. You recall no one, and her daughter, Miss Olis Danforth, who was the loveliest thing in 3 ballrooms this season and wasted upon every man in them. I intend she should not be wasted upon you." The Duke's jaw set. So that was the shape of the visit. He might have known. He watched the 2 women hand down from the second carriage, the mother stout and satisfied, the daughter a picture. There was no denying it. Dark-haired and white-shouldered and dressed with the ruthless precision of a young woman who had been told from the cradle that her face was her fortune and had believed it. Miss Odalis Danforth crossed the gravel as though the gravel ought to be grateful, and lifted her eyes to the great cold front of Ivermore, and the Duke saw her price it. He had seen the look 100 times. It was the look of a woman appraising a house she means to own. Your Grace, she said, sinking into a curtsy so graceful it was nearly a performance. I have heard such things of Ivermore. I confess I did not believe the half of them. I see now I was told the lesser half. Miss Danforth. He bowed the exact depth that courtesy required and not a hair's breadth more, and had the small cold satisfaction of watching her register that the depth was insufficient, and paint over the registering with a smile. They went in. And the house, which for 3 days had felt to him obscurely and unaccountably lighter, closed its cold weight o' him again, and he moved through the afternoon of arrivals and refreshments and his aunt's relentless management like a man wading upstream. It was Lady Honoria who commanded that there should be an evening of it. She had come 4 days over bad roads, she declared, and she would not sit in silence like a Quaker. There would be music in the long drawing-room after dinner, and cards. And she had brought Miss Danforth 200 miles, and Miss Danforth would sing, and Uriah would sit and listen and behave as though he possessed a heart, whether he possessed one or not. The Duke did not argue. He had learned long ago that arguing with his aunt cost more than obedience and yielded less, and so the mishap, when it came dressed as an ordinary evening. He was standing by the long windows of the drawing-room, a little apart as was his custom, when the door opened and a girl came in with a taper to light the candles along the far wall, and it was her, Marisol Cardogan. He had thought her gone back to Hollowmere on the fish-cart days since. He had told himself, sternly and repeatedly, that she was gone, that the disturbance of her was over, that a sensible man did not keep an accounting of an apothecary's daughter, and here she was, in the same grey stuff dress with its inward turned mend, reaching up to the sconces with the taper, kept on, he understood in a rush, by Mrs. Peel, who had extra hands to want with the house full of company, and who had no notion that the girl on the step-stool had 3 nights, pun made her master in his own study. He had not known his own heart would lift so at the sight of a taper being carried across a room. It alarmed him considerably. He had spent 7 years teaching that heart to lift for nothing, and it had learned the lesson so thoroughly that he had believed it broken past mending. And here it was, disgracing him over a candle flame and a mended cuff, as unruly as a boy's. What happened next happened quickly, and he could not afterward have said he was sorry it did. His aunt, sweeping in from the card table in search of a footstool, caught sight of the slim figure at the candles, caught sight, that is, of a young woman with a straight back and a fine grave profile, and a way of standing that owed nothing to her dress, and Lady Honoria, who was short of sight and long of confidence, made the whole evening in a single wrong step. "There you are, child," she said, bearing down. "You are one of the young people Mrs. Danforth spoke of, I make no doubt. A cousin, is it? Some connection down from town. Do not lurk by the wall like a mouse. It is very bad manners in the young to lurk. Come and be looked at. Uriah. Here is a girl I have never met in a house that is meant to be yours. Introduce us and mend your hospitality." The Duke opened his mouth. Across the room, Marisol had gone the colour of the candle she held, and he watched her understand the mistake entire in the space of a breath. And he watched her draw the honest air to correct it. "I am no one's cousin, my lady, I am the girl come up to light your candles," and he watched with a helpless private astonishment his own mouth move before hers could. "Miss Cardogan," he heard himself say of Hollowmere. "She is a guest of the house." He did not know why he said it. He knew only that he could not bear to see her turned, before this glittering assembled company, back into weather, back into the invisible thing that lit rooms and was not thanked. And that the words were out of him and standing in the middle of the drawing-room before he had weighed a single consequence of them, which was a thing the Duke of Ivermore had not done since he was a boy. Marisol looked at him. It was one look, the length of a heartbeat. And in it he read everything, the plea to be let confess the truth, the fear of the lie, and beneath both, so quick he might have imagined it, a flare of something that was almost laughter, the same desperate hilarity he had seen in her at 2 in the morning. Then she set the taper down with steady hands and turned to his aunt, and dropped a curtsy that was not the bob of a servant but a lady's curtsy, plain and correct, because she was too honest to act a part, but too kind to shame him before his own guests by exposing him. "Lady Honoria," she said. "You are good to notice me." Cardogan. His aunt tasted the name and did not know it, which was a mercy. "I do not place the family, But you have a very pretty way of standing still, my dear, which is more than I can say for most, and I forgive you the lurking. Come, sit. Miss Danforth is to sing. You shall tell me afterward whether it moved you, and I shall know at once from your face whether you are honest, for I have no patience with girls who are not. Then I shall be no trouble to your patience, my lady, said Marisol, for I have never learned to be anything else, and it has cost me dear. Lady Honoria barked a short surprised laugh and was charmed, and the Duke, watching, felt the strangest sensation pass through him. Pride, he realized with a jolt. Pride in a village girl he had known 3 days. It was absurd. He was not entitled to it. He took himself to the window again and stood in the dark of the curtain and could not, for all his discipline, keep his eyes from the room. He saw it all then. He saw the fine company take her measure and find her wanting. It did not take them long. Odalise Danforth at the pianoforte ran a glance over the grey dress and the work-reddened hands and the mend at the cuff, and the temperature of her interest dropped to freezing, and she began, in the way of clever cruel women, to make of Marisol a small entertainment for the evening. She sang beautifully. He would grant her that. Her voice was a trained and lovely instrument, and when the applause had settled she turned upon her stool with her lovely idle smile and said, "And you, Miss Cadogan, Holomere, was it? I do not think I know it. Is it very gay? Do you have much society there?" "It is a small place, Miss Danforth," said Marisol. "We have as much society as we can carry, and no more. How quaint! And what does one do there for accomplishment? You must play, or sing, or no. No, I see you do not. Well, it is no matter. Not every girl can be brought up to please." The smile widened, sweet as honey and cold as the grave. "Some are brought up merely to be useful. It is a kind of virtue, I am told, though I confess I have never had occasion to acquire it." A ripple of laughter went round the card table. Mrs. Danforth tittered behind her fan, and the Duke, in the dark of the curtain, felt his hand close hard on the cold brass of the window latch, and knew a violence of feeling so sudden and so unfamiliar that it frightened him, the plain wish to cross the room and put an end to it. To see Odalise Danforth's smile break upon his contempt as so many smiles had broken there before. He did not have to. "You are quite right, Miss Danforth," said Marisol, and her voice was low and even and carried to every corner of the quieted room. "I was brought up to be useful. My father was an apothecary in a poor parish, and he was useful to the dying when the physicians would not come down the low street for fear of the fever, and he died of it useful, sitting up with other men's children through the nights nobody else would sit. I have no accomplishments, and I have played at no pianoforte, and I cannot sing a note that anyone should wish to hear, but I have held the hand of a stranger while she died, because there was no one grander to do it, and I found I did not think it beneath me. I hope that when I am your age, Miss Danforth, I shall have learned to think as little of usefulness as you do, but I begin to fear I never shall." The silence that fell was total. Mrs. Danforth's fan hung frozen in the air. Lady Honoria, who missed little for all her short sight, was looking at Marisol Cadogan with a new and considering sharpness. And Odalise had gone very white about the mouth and had no answer, because there was none, because the girl in the mended dress had not been cruel and had not been meek, but had simply told the truth so cleanly that cruelty had nowhere left to stand. The Duke of Ivermore, in the dark of the curtain, discovered that he had stopped breathing. He did not go to her. He was too wise and too much a coward in this one thing to go to her in front of them all. But when the evening at last broke apart, when his aunt had claimed her wariness and Miss Danforth had swept out on a tide of wounded dignity, and the long drawing-room had emptied of everyone who had come to price him, he found himself, not by accident, in the cold corridor outside, where a girl was gathering up the spent candle ends into a basket because no one had told her she might stop being useful, and the lie of the evening had fallen away, and she was only herself again. "You need not do that," he said. "It is late." She did not startle this time. She straightened the basket on her hip and looked at him in the light of the single branch of candles she had kept back, and there was no fear in her face at all now, only a tiredness that went deeper than the body. "Someone must, Your Grace. And I would rather it were me than that you wake Mrs. Peel, who has been on her feet since 5. You should not have suffered that woman's tongue," he said. "In my house, I should have stopped it." For a moment she said nothing, only weighed the spent wax in her palm as though it were a matter of consequence. He had grown so accustomed to being answered instantly, with fear, with flattery, with the quick, eager agreement of people who wished to be gone from him, that her silence unsettled him more than any reply could have. Why? Faint, weary smile. You did a braver thing. You gave a candle girl a name to sit in that room by, and then you stood in the curtain and let me fight my own battle, because you saw that I had it to fight and that I would not thank you for taking it from me. That was rightly done, your grace, though I do not think you knew, when you did it, that it was. She set the basket down. May I say a thing that will offend you? You have never yet asked permission before. Then I am learning caution in your house, which is a poor place to learn it. The smile faded. You are the loneliest man I have ever seen. Saw it 3 nights ago in an empty chair, and I saw it tonight in a full room. You stood in that curtain among your own guests like a man watching a country he was exiled from through a window, and I do not think it is coldness at all, whatever they say of you. I think you are a warm man who has been so long persuaded that warmth is dangerous that you have forgotten it is also what keeps a body alive. And I think you knew it the moment you said the word guest, and it frightened you, and it frightens you now, and you have come out here to a cold corridor to say a hard thing to me so that I will go away and stop being frightening. There, now you may dismiss me, and I shall not blame you for it. The Duke of Ivermore stood in the corridor of the house he had made into a tomb, and looked at the apothecary's daughter, and felt the whole careful architecture of 7 years' silence shift beneath him like ice in a thaw. She had done it again. She had walked into the one closed room and lit the candles there without asking, and the terror of it was so great, and the sweetness of it was so great, and the two were so exactly the same size, that he could do only what he had trained a lifetime to do, when a feeling grew too large to be borne. "Thank you, Miss Cardogan," he said, and his voice was the carved voice, the county's voice, the cold Duke's voice, and he watched it land on her and saw her flinch and hated himself, and could not stop. "You have had a long evening. Barrow will see you to your room. Good night." He turned before he could see what his own coldness did to her face, and he walked away down the dark corridor with his back very straight, and he did not stop until he had reached the study and shut the door and set his hand flat upon it, as though to hold shut a thing that had already got out. He stood a long time in the dark. The chair by the hearth had been cleaned. It stood clean and empty in the ember light, waiting, and the Duke of Ivermore, who had ordered a girl dismissed to her bed with the voice he kept for bishops and fools, sat down slowly at last in his mother's chair. The first living soul to sit in it in 7 years, but the one who had wandered in by mistake, and put his head into his hands, and understood, with the completeness of a man who has run out of places to hide from a thing, that he was not going to be able to stop thinking of her, and that no cold word he could summon, however carved, was going to make her go away, because she had not walked into an empty room in his house at all. She had walked into the empty room in him. He found the pretext 3 days later, and despised himself a little for the pleasure it gave him to find it. The linen wanted counting. That was the whole of the errand, and it was no errand at all. The housekeeper counted the linen twice a year and had done so a fortnight since. But the Duke of Ivermore had discovered, in the days since a seamstress had risen from his chair, and told him to his face that he was not so cold as they said below stairs, that his household ran upon 100 small excuses a man of resolve might make, and that he had never once in 6 years troubled to make one. He made this one badly. He stood in the door of the long east sewing room at the failing of the light, with a candle branch already lit against the coming dark, and said to the room at large that he wished to see how his household's cloth was kept, and watched 3 women rise from their stools in a flurry of dropped thimbles and terror, and 1 woman not rise at all, only lift her head from the shirt across her knee, and look at him with those level, unstartled eyes, as though a duke in a sewing-room door were merely one more thing the evening had chosen to bring her. "Your Grace," said Mareschal Cardogan, and set her needle in the hem where it would not be lost, and stood as the others stood, but without the terror. He did not know what he had meant to do. He had meant, he supposed, to be looked at again in that plain way that asked nothing of him and forgave him nothing either. Now that he was here he found the wanting of it absurd and the other 2 women a torment, And so he did the thing a duke may always do, which is to command his own escape. You keep the ledgers of the mending, he said to her. It was not true. He had no notion who kept them. But she inclined her head as though it were, and he thought he could not be sure in that light that something at the corner of her mouth understood exactly what he was about and had decided out of mercy to permit it. Bring them to the library. The rest of you sit. The rest of them sat. He turned before his face could betray him and went down the cold corridor with the candles guttering in their sconces, and did not look back to see whether she followed, because a man does not look back, and because he could not have borne to find that she did not. She did. He heard the light even tread of her behind him, unhurried, a servant's tread that yet contrived somehow never to sound like a servant's. And when he came into the library and turned, she was there in the doorway with no ledger in her hands at all. Of course there was no ledger. They both knew there was no ledger, and she stood on the threshold and did not come in. I have not brought the accounts, she said. There are none of the kind you mean. I thought I would rather tell you so plainly than carry an empty book across the house to keep a fiction tidy. No, he said. You would rather that. You do not care for the linen, your grace. I do not care for the linen. Then what? She asked, and it was not insolent. It was the gentlest question he had been asked in years. Do you send for a plain woman across a cold house at nightfall to have? The fire had been banked low. He crossed to it and stirred it into waking, because it gave his hands a thing to do and his face a reason to be turned away, and the flame came up and threw its red across the ranked spines of 1,000 books his father had bought, and he had never opened, and he said, with his back to her and to his own astonishment, the truth. Your company, said the Duke of Ivermore. I find I want your company. I have not wanted anyone's this long while, and I did not think the appetite would return to me. It appears I was mistaken. Come in. You may leave the door as wide as you please. Leave it against the wall if it eases you, but come in out of the cold. I am too old to court a chill for the sake of my dignity. He heard her come in. He heard her leave the door, he noted, half open, not shut, not flung wide, but a woman's exact and fearless measure of a thing, enough for her honor and not 1 inch more for his vanity. And when he turned she was standing by the great table with her reddened hands folded and her chin level, and the firelight, kind at last to face the day, had been unkind too. You read, he said. It came out of him abruptly. He had seen it in the sewing room without knowing he had seen it. The way her eyes had gone once, involuntarily, hungrily, along his shelves as she passed. Colour came into her cheek. My father was a schoolmaster, your grace, in Netherfold before the fever took him, and my mother in the one winter. He taught the village its letters, and he taught me a little more than the village, having no son then to spend it on. She said it as one lays out plain fact upon a table, without the smallest bid for his pity, and it was the absence of the bid that reached him. I had 11 years of him. It was enough to spoil me for contentment, and not enough to keep me from the needle. There is a deal of shirts between me and the books I was raised to, but I read what comes to my hand. The steward lends me the almanac. Once I mended a lady's travelling cloak and found a book of poems left in the pocket, and I kept it 3 days before I gave it back, and I am not sorry. What became of the rest of them? Your people. There is my brother, Tobiah. He is prentice to a printer in the town, which he thinks a great calm down. I think a mercy for a boy who could not sit still to save his soul is put now where the words go by him all day, whether he will or no. Her mouth curved. I send him what I can. He sends me back the spoiled sheets, the misprints they would burn, so that I shall have something to read that is not an almanac. Last month it was half of a sermon and the whole of a shipping list. I read them both by this window here, that the steward lets me use when the sewing room has no candle to spare. That is how I know your library, your grace, though you have never seen me in it. I have kept you company a great while. You only did not know. The disturbance he had felt 3 mornings since, that shifting of some long frozen weight, moved in him again and further, and he understood with a kind of quiet alarm that it was not going to stop. That whatever had been set going in him by an accident and a plain word was not a thing he could bank like the fire and leave to gutter. He came round the table. He did not mean to. He found himself doing it, the way a man finds himself at the foot of a stair he did not remember climbing. "Sit," he said more gently than he had said anything in 6 years, and drew out a chair himself with his own hand. The Duke of Ivermore drawing out a chair for a seamstress, and she looked at it and looked at him and did not sit. "If I sit," she said quietly, "I shall be a woman who sat with the Duke in his library at night, and I shall carry that downstairs to the sewing room, where it will be seen in my face whether I speak of it or no. And where Lady Audley's Danforth's woman will read it in a half-hour and Lady Audley's in an hour after, and by the week's end I shall be either turned off or talked of, and neither of those is a thing you would have to bear, your grace, and both are things I would." She said it evenly, without reproach, as one states the weather to a man who has not looked out of doors. "You do not think of these things. You have never in your life had to. I do not blame you for it. But you should know that the cost of your company is not the same for me as for you, and that I have counted it, and that I am still here." He stood with his hand on the back of the chair and felt the truth of it go into him like cold water, that he had, in his whole cosseted life, never once paid the price of anything, that his rank had made a country in which he could not learn what a step cost, because he was carried, and that this woman with the raw knuckles reckoned in a breath a sum he had never in his life been made to add. He took his hand from the chair. "Then we will not sit," he said. "Walk with me instead. The terrace, the yew walk, it is open ground, it is nearly dark, and a duke may be seen taking the evening air with whom he pleases, and no ledger kept of it. Will that answer your arithmetic?" Something moved across face that he had not seen there before, surprise, and then a warmth she did not trouble to hide, and she said, "It will answer it better," and took up her shawl from where it lay across a chair, and went with him out through the long doors onto the terrace where the last grey of the day was going out of the west and the first stars were pricking through above the black yews, and the cold came clean and sharp off the frost-stiffened lawns. They walked. He did not offer his arm, which would have undone all her careful measuring in a stroke, and she did not seem to want it, and so they went side by side down the yew walk with a good foot of frozen dusk between them. And he found that in that foot of air there was more of a woman's true nearness than he had felt in 6 years of scented rooms. She told him more as they went, not confidingly, not to be pitied, but because he asked, and because she seemed to have decided that a plain answer was less trouble than a guarded one, of the fever winter, of walking 11 miles to this house at 15 with a bundle and a character from the curate, and being taken on to card wool, and rising to the needle because her seams held, of a wage she named without shame, and he heard with something close to it, of a life reckoned in candle ends and misprinted sermons, and the 3 days' theft of a book of poems, and lived, for all that, without a grain of the soreness he would have thought it certain fruit. "You will think me a strange sort of servant," she said, when he had said nothing for a space and only walked, "to speak to you so freely. My father's doing that too. He would have it that a person is a person clear through, that there is no gentle blood and common blood, but only the one red kind, and that a body who minded his manners might say a true thing to a king, and the king be the better for it. It served him ill enough in life. He was thought above himself and paid for the thinking, but I have never yet found a way to leave off believing it, and I have tried in rooms where believing it might have got me turned into the road." She glanced sidelong at him in the dark. "You are not turning me into the road, your grace, so perhaps there was something in it after all. You are not bitter," he said. They had come to the turn of the walk, where an old stone bench stood grey with frost, and she had stopped, and he had stopped, and the house behind them showed its few lit windows small and far. "I have not the leisure for it," she said simply. "Bitterness is a thing you must feed, your grace, and feed daily, and I have my brother to feed instead. Besides," she looked out at the dark lawns, and her breath smoked in the starlight, "my father used to say a grudge is only a hope that has soured for want of turning. I turn mine. It keeps sweeter." He looked at her, at the plain profile, the breath at her lips, the shawl clutched at her throat with a hand he now knew the whole history of, and the thing he had been holding off since a grey morning 3 days gone came up in him past all holding. And he heard himself say what he had told no living soul. "There was a woman," said the Duke of Ivermore low, "who told me every day for a year that she loved me. She was very good at it. She was better at it than any woman I have known, and I believed her, because I was younger and because I wished to. When a man came to court her whose title stood a rung above my own, she went to him in a fortnight and told me, kindly she thought it kind, that I could not have supposed it was ever myself she meant when there was more to be had. I have made it my whole study since to be a man no one can reach, so that no one may reach in and do that again. It has worked very well. It has cost me only every warm thing I owned. And then a seamstress fell asleep in my chair and would not tell me a lie to save her place, and I find the study of 6 years undone in a week, and I do not know, I confess to you I do not know, whether to bless the accident or curse it. She was quiet a long moment. The frost sang faintly in the yews. When she spoke it was not to soothe him, and he loved her for it before he had let himself know the word. Bless it, she said, but mind your grace, you are doing the very thing you say she did to you, only turned about. She wanted the coronet and called it you. You look at me and you are so glad to find a woman who does not want it that you have not yet asked whether she might want you, and those are not the same, and a decent man ought to leave the second question to the woman, and not answer it for her out of his own gladness. She turned then, full to him, and the starlight was in her level eyes. I will not be the cure for what that lady did to you. I am not a poultice. If you want my company, I have given it, and gladly, and it has been the warmest hour of my winter. But do not mistake me for the mending of your old wound. I am a person, your grace. I came out here a person, and I mean to go in one. He stood before her, humbled to the ground, and understood that he had been, for all his rank, comprehensively outthought and out-honored by a woman with 11 miles and a dead schoolmaster to her name, and that he had never in his life wanted anyone as he wanted, in that instant, only to be found worthy of plain regard. Marisol, he said her name for the first time, and he saw it land on her like a hand laid gently on the arm. You are the least mistakable person I have ever met. Forgive me. You are right in all of it. And he lifted his hand slowly and did not take her cold fingers from her throat, though he wanted it past reason. He only closed his own about the frozen air a hair's breadth from hers, so near that he could feel the small warmth her hand gave off into the night, and held it there, not touching, the whole span of a held breath, a near thing, an almost. A thing they both felt to the root, and neither crossed. And then he let it fall. Go in, he said, roughly, because if she stayed he was not sure of his study any longer at all. Go in by the side door, where you will not be seen with me. Keep your place safe. I would not have you pay a farthing for my gladness. She drew her shawl close. At the edge of the terrace light she paused, and looked back at him standing bareheaded in the dark he had made his home, and said, They are wrong below stairs, your grace. It was never that you were cold. It was only that you were careful. I have mended enough torn things to know the difference. And she was gone through the side door into the yellow light, and he stood alone on the frost with his hand, still remembering the warmth it had not touched. He did not hear the terrace door behind him open a hand's width, nor see the lit shape that stood a moment in the gap and watched the Duke of Ivermore standing wrapped in the dark where a seamstress had just left him, and drew back softly, and softly closed it. He knew nothing of it. He knew only that he had told his shame to a woman who owned nothing, and that she had given him back not comfort, but the harder and better thing, the truth of himself, and that whatever it cost, whatever careful house of 6 years' building came down about him for it, he was not, now, going to be able to stop. For 2 days after the dusk in the library, the Duke of Ivermore went about his own house doing a poor and astonishing impersonation of a happy man. He was not fully aware of it himself. It was his aunt who told him. She caught him at the breakfast table on the second morning with his coffee going cold and his eyes on the window, where a slight grey figure was crossing the far end of the terrace with a basket of cut greenery for the hall. And Lady Honoria set down her knife and regarded him over her spectacles with the frank astonishment of a woman who has seen a statue turn its head. You are smiling, she said, in the tone she might have used to announce a fire. Uriah. You are sitting at your own table and smiling at a window like a boy who has been left a fortune. I have descended upon this mausoleum twice a year for 22 years, and I have never once seen it, and I find I do not know whether to be delighted or to send for the physician. I was thinking of an account, said the Duke. You were thinking of no such thing. A man does not go soft about the mouth over an account. She followed the direction of his gaze, and her sharp old eyes narrowed, and the Duke felt too late the danger of having a relation who missed nothing. She said, and left it there, which alarmed him a good deal more than if she had pursued it. He could not have defended himself in any case, for she was right, and he knew she was right, and the knowledge sat in him these 2 days like sunlight in a room long shuttered, unbearable and marvellous at once. He had spent an hour with Marisol Cardogan among the shelves of his own cold library at dusk, and nothing had happened that the strictest chaperon could have named, and everything had happened. She had reached for a book above her, and he had reached to steady it. And their hands had lain a breath apart upon the same worn spine for the length of 3 heartbeats, and neither had drawn away, and in that not drawing away the Duke of Ivermore had understood that 7 years of careful winter were ended, and that he did not want them back. She had told him, without one grain of self-pity, of the cold cottage at Hollowmere, and the depths her father's kindness had left and the winters she had kept off starvation with her needle, and she had told it as a soldier tells of a campaign, plainly owning her scars and asking no bandage for them. And he had listened, and had wanted, with a want so simple it frightened him, to stand between that brave tired woman and every hard wind that had ever blown on her. That was the trouble. That was the whole of the trouble, for the Duke of Ivermore had wanted, once before, and had dressed a woman in his want as one dresses a doll, and had discovered, on a morning 6 years gone, that he did not let himself remember above of once a 12-month, that the devotion he had believed in had been a ledger all along, that he had been, to the lovely creature he meant to marry, a house and a title and a settlement wearing a man's coat and no more, that she had laughed of it, in a room she did not know he stood near. He had built the cold Duke that same year, stone upon stone, and had lived behind him warm enough for a man who has decided never to be cold again by the simple expedient of never being anything at all. And now a candle girl had walked into the one closed room and thrown open the shutters, and he lay awake at night torn clean in two between the sweetness of the light and the old animal certainty that light was the very thing that had cost him most. He told himself he would speak to his aunt. He would do the thing openly and be done with it. Say to her, this is no cousin from town. This is Marisol Cardogan, the apothecary's daughter, and she is worth every soul under this roof laid end to end, and I will not her cold weather in my house another day. He rehearsed it. He did not say it. 2 days he did not say it, and told himself it was for the choosing of the moment, and knew, in the honest cold hour before dawn, that it was fear. The moment was chosen for him, as such moments are, by those who had been waiting for it. Lady Audley's Danforth had not swept out of the long drawing-room 3 nights before and forgotten the girl who had shamed her. Ladies of her particular gift do not forget, they invest. She had spent 2 days being charming to housekeepers and idle with footmen, asking small bright questions in the sweet voice that opens the doors of servants who have not yet learned that a smiling gentlewoman below stairs is a magistrate in disguise. And on the 3rd morning in the yellow saloon, with Lady Honoria settled at her embroidery and Mrs. Danforth pouring and the Duke standing by the cold chimney-piece where he could see the terrace, Lady Audley's laid down what she had bought. I have had the most diverting piece of intelligence, she began, addressing the room at large in the manner of one distributing sweets, and I declare I have puzzled how to say it, for I would not for the world give pain. But I think, Lady Honoria, you are too great a friend to truth to thank me for keeping it from you. She let a little silence bloom. Your Miss Cardogan of Hollowmere, the guest of the house, is no guest at all. She is a village girl, hired by the week to light the candles and polish the stairs. The apothecary's daughter. She came up on the fish cart. The whole servants' hall has laughed of it these 3 days, how the fine lady on the stool was made a guest before us all, and let it stand and never breathed a word. Mrs. Danforth's fan stilled. Lady Honoria's needle paused above her linen, and the Duke of Ivermore at the chimney-piece felt the room turn slowly upon him like a wheel. And that, said Lady Audalis, softening her voice to its most wounded gentleness, I might have forgiven her, poor thing, for who does not reach above her station when a great house opens its door by mistake? But I am grieved to say it does not end at candles. She has been seen, your grace. I say it only because it touches your own honor, coming down from the private wing at dusk, from the very library, in your own company, with no one by. The maids have made a song of it. I do not repeat what they sing. I say only that a scheming girl who will let herself be called a lady will let herself be called a great deal worse, if the prize be large enough, and the prize under this roof is very large indeed. The silence that followed was the silence the Duke knew his own, the tomes, the 7-year silence, and he understood with a plunging sickness that every eye in the yellow saloon had come to rest upon his face to see how the cold Duke would meet the naming of a scandal at his own hearth. And the cold Duke met it as he had been built to meet it. It was not a decision. That was the horror of the thing afterward, when he had leisure to hate himself for it. It was not that he weighed the moment and chose wrongly, but that the old armor closed over him of its own weight. Faster than love could get its coat on, and he heard his own voice come out of the winter, level, carved, unmoved. "You take a great deal of trouble, Lady Odelles," he said, "over the doings of a candle girl." It was not a defense of her. He knew it was not, even as it left him. He had meant it. In the wreck of the instant, to scatter the charge, to say the matter is beneath us all, and it had come out as agreement, as the shrug of a great man declining to be touched by so small a thing, and he saw Lady Odales's mouth curve, because she had got precisely what she had come for. He had not said, "She is no candle girl to me." He had not said, "The fault of the library is mine and I am proud of it." He had stood at his own hearth, with the truth of the finest thing that had ever entered his house waiting on his tongue, and he had reached, in his terror, for the one word that would keep him safe, and the word was cold, and it damned her. "There," said Lady Odales, satisfied. "You see how his Grace regards it. I was foolish to be so distressed. He should have crossed the room then and torn the whole day open. He did not. He was a man who had walked out onto ice and heard it groan beneath him, and every instinct of 7 years' training bade him stand very still, and he stood very still, and hated the stillness, and could not break it. It was his aunt who broke it, though not as he would have wished. Lady Honoria set down her embroidery with great deliberation. "How very interesting," she said, in a voice like a closing door, "that a girl of no family should have more truth in her than a saloon full of people who possess a great deal of it." And she looked, as she said it, not at Odalys Danforth, but at her nephew, and the Duke of Ivermore learned in that one look that his aunt had seen the whole of him, the smiling at the window and the winter at the hearth both, and found the second wanting. He went to find Marisol. That at least he did, but he went carrying the cold with him, because he did not know how to put it down, and a man who comes to a wounded person still wearing his armor does more harm than the sword that struck first. He found her in the linen room off the North Passage, alone, folding sheets that did not need folding, and he saw at once from the set of her shoulders that the whole of it had already come down to her, that the servants' hall had brought her the yellow saloon before he could. She did not turn when he came in. She went on smoothing the linen with hands that he saw now were not quite steady, and she said, without looking at him, in a voice scoured very clean of everything, "You need not have come, your Grace. I know how you regarded it. It was carried to the kitchen inside the quarter hour. A candle girl. Yes," she folded. "It is a true word. I ought to thank you for the accuracy of it. Marisol." Her name came out of him rough, unpracticed. He had never yet said it aloud. "You must let me. There is a way to mend this. You cannot stay under the roof with that woman's tongue at work. It will follow you into the village. It will touch your name. I will provide for you. There is a cottage on the Wexlow side, and a sum settled, enough that you need never take up a needle again, nor stand on another stool as long as you live. You will be safe. You will be beyond her reach and beyond all of it. Only let me arrange it, and you need never." He heard himself and could not stop himself, and knew even as the words fell what he was doing. He was paying her off. He was doing to her precisely the thing that had been done to men and women all his life by frightened rich people. He was solving her, closing her account, buying his own peace and calling it her rescue, because a settlement was a thing he understood and a woman he had almost loved was a thing he did not. She turned then. She turned and looked at him, and her face was not angry. That was the worst of it. He could have borne anger. Her face was only very quiet and very white, and older by years than it had been at dusk in the library, and her level eyes went over him once, slowly, the way a person reads the last line of a letter. "Cottage," she said. And a sum settled. She set the folded sheet down upon the pile with great care, as though it were the last civil thing she meant to do in that house. "Do you know, Your Grace, 3 nights ago I told you that you were a warm man who had forgotten that warmth keeps a body alive. I was wrong, and I beg your pardon for it was a liberty, and I see now it was also a foolishness. You have not forgotten. You remember it very well. You remember it so well that when your fine lady named me a schemer before your aunt, you did not say I lied. You said I was small. And now you come to me with money in your hand, because a man who has decided a thing is small may pay to be rid of it and keep his heart quite clean. That is not," he began. "I wanted nothing of you." Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. It went through him like cold water through cloth. "That is the thing you cannot believe, and I understand at last why you cannot. For a man is only ever betrayed by what he most needs, and you have plainly been betrayed once past bearing, but hear it once from someone who will not profit by the saying. I wanted nothing of you. Not the cottage. Not the settlement. Not the name you lent me in that room, which I never asked for and which has cost me the only thing I owned. My good plain place in a small world where no one thought me a schemer, because no one thought me worth the trouble. I wanted only the man I spoke to in the dark, who was kind to me when he thought no one was watching, and who I begin to fear does not exist at all, who is only a thing you let out at 2 in the morning to keep you company, and lock up again by daylight when the important people are awake." The linen room was very still. Somewhere below, a door closed. The Duke of Ivermore stood with his rejected fortune still hanging foolishly in the air between them, and could not find, in all the carved and lettered rooms of himself, one single word that was not either a lie or a wound. "Keep your cottage, Your Grace." She reached up and untied, with steady fingers now, the strings of the apron Mrs. Peel had given her, and folded it too, and laid it upon the sheets. "I will walk to Hollowmere. It is not far, and I have walked worse in worse weather, and I would rather arrive at my own cold door on my own 2 feet than ride to a fine one on your gilt. I hope your aunt's visit is soon over. I hope you find your winter comfortable. And I am sorry, I am truly sorry, that I woke you, for I think you were happier asleep, and I had no right to the chair." She went past him to the door. She did not brush him. She took great care not to, and the care was worse than a blow. At the threshold she paused, and for one moment he thought, with a leap of the heart that shamed him, that she would turn, that there was more, that the thing was not yet closed past all mending. But she only said, without turning, so low that he might almost have dreamed it, "You had the truest thing in England standing in your own linen room, and you offered it money. Good day." And then she was gone down the north passage, her tread quick and even and unhurried, a woman walking away from a great house with nothing in her hands, and her back very straight. And the Duke of Ivermore stood among the folded sheets in the grey light, and heard the outer door open far off and close, and did not go after her, because the armour would not let him, because 7 years does not fall in an afternoon, because he was a coward in this one thing, and had proved it now past any argument. When at last he moved, was to the window, from long and evil habit, to watch the terrace. He was in time to see her cross it, the slight grey figure with the inward mended cuff. The woman his aunt had watched him smile at not 3 hours since, going away from Ivermore down the long avenue between the dripping elms, growing smaller, not once looking back at the cold house that had named her and shamed her, and tried to buy her silence. He watched until the mist at the foot of the park took her. Then he watched the empty avenue a good while longer, as a man watches the sea that has closed over something he let fall. Behind him in the great house, his aunt was ordering the carriages. The Danforths would leave within the week, their errand spoiled, their quarry untouched. It did not matter. Nothing in the yellow saloon mattered. The Duke of Ivermore stood at the window with his hand upon the cold curtain and understood, with the completeness of a man who has at last run entirely out of armour, that he had done the thing himself, that there was no villain to blame, no scheme to unmask, no wrong to be righted by another's downfall, that he had been handed, by a mishap and a mercy, the one warm thing his frozen life would ever be offered, and had put out both his careful hands and pushed it off the terrace into the mist, and called the pushing prudence. The chair by the study hearth was clean and empty. The house was full of people and had never in 7 years been so silent. And somewhere on the low road to Hollomer a tired, brave woman walked home through the rain to a colder hearth than his, carrying nothing of his but the wound of him. And the Duke at the window that the deadlock could not stand, that a man cannot live in the ruin of the only warmth he was ever shown, and knew too with a cold that was entirely his own making, that he had not the first idea on God's earth how a proud man begins to undo a thing like this, nor whether she would suffer him within a mile of her door to try. For 3 days the Duke of Ivermore did not go near the sewing-room, and told himself it was mercy. He told himself a great many things in those 3 days, and found that a man who has spent 6 years building careful walls has, ready to hand, a whole architecture of reasons. It was mercy to keep away from her. It was prudence. He had said what he had said in the long gallery only to close the matter before it could be made ugly. He had heard Odellis Danforth's soft laugh going down the stair, and he had turned, in front of his steward and 2 footmen and the lady herself, and said in the flat voice he used for creditors that the girl was a mender engaged for the winter drapes and nothing whatever besides, and that he would thank the household to remember its own business as he remembered his. He had said it to save her. That was the reason he kept and turned over and polished, and it was a lie, and he knew by the second night that it was a lie, because a man does not lie awake burnishing a thing of which he is not ashamed. She had been at the gallery's far end when he said it. He had not known that until he saw her, until he saw the small stillness come over her where she knelt at the window seat with the pins in her mouth, saw her take the pins out one by one and set them in the paper and fold the paper, saw her rise without haste and gather the drapery over her arm and go not fast, not slow, past him and past Odellis and out through the low door, with her chin exactly where it had always been and her eyes gone somewhere he could not follow. She had not looked at him. That was the whole of it. In 6 years he had faced down 2 lawsuits, a duel he had refused to fire, and the worst of his own family, and none of it had cost him what it cost him to be, for the length of a woman crossing a room, unlooked at by Marisol Cardogan. On the 4th day his housekeeper, Mrs. Peel, came to him in the estate room with her hands folded and her mouth set, and said that the seamstress had asked to be released of her engagement a fortnight early, and had refused the balance of her wage above the days she had worked, and had asked only for the loan of the trap as far as the turnpike, from which she would walk. She would take nothing that was not earned, your grace, Mrs. Peel said, and there was in the old woman's flat report a thing that was not quite reproach and was worse than reproach. I thought it right you should know a good worker is leaving us, whatever the reason, which is not my business. No, said the Duke, it is not. And Mrs. Peel inclined her head and went, and left him with the ledgers open before him, and not a figure in them that he could read, because Amanda was even now folding her small bundle in the room under the north eaves, meaning to walk to the turnpike in the cold with nothing of his in her hands, nor even the wage she had honestly earned, and he had done that, he, and no one else, no villain, no rival, no cruelty but his own. He had taken the one person in the length of his acquaintance, who had never once wanted a farthing or a favour, or the coronet of him, the one who had stood on his frost and refused to be his poultice, refused to be his cure, insisted with her cold hand at her throat on being only and entirely a person, and to keep his own name smooth before a woman he had ceased to love years since, he had stood in his own gallery and made her into a nothing, a mender engaged for the winter drapes, nothing whatever besides. He sat a long time. The fire went down and he did not ring for it. Somewhere in the house a clock told the half hours and he let them go. And in the grey cold of the unfed room the whole careful architecture of his reasons came down, quietly, without drama, the way a wall comes down when at last a man stops holding it up. And what stood in the wreck of it was very plain and not to be argued with, and it was this, that he was afraid. That he had been afraid the entire while, not of scandal, not of the servants' talk, not even of Odellis Danforth's soft laugh on the stair. He had been afraid of the size of what Marisol Cardogan made him feel, because the last time he had let a woman have the run of his heart, she had looked at his lands and his title and his person all together and chosen only the first 2, and left him standing at an altar with the whole county to watch, and he had sworn, a young man savage, foolish. understandable oath that he would never again be caught wanting, and here was a woman who wanted nothing of his at all, who could not be accused of the sin Odalis had committed even in the smallest degree, and he had punished her for it. He had punished her precisely because she was safe to love, and that was the coward's arithmetic, and he was done with it. There had been, that very forenoon, a moment that showed him the whole shape of himself, and he had not liked the look of it. Odalis Danforth, who was staying out her visit with the patient cruelty of a cat at a mouse hole, had found him in the morning room and remarked, over her chocolate, how well he managed his people now, how cool he had grown, how nicely governed. Not at all the raw boy who had once made such a spectacle of his heart. She had meant it as flattery, or as a wound dressed up in flattery, which was the only coin she had ever dealt in, and he had looked at her handsome, satisfied face across the little table and understood, with a clarity that turned his stomach, that in the gallery 3 days before he had done her a courtesy. He had proved her right. He had shown her that her lesson had taken, that Ivermore was cured of caring, that a girl might be made nothing with a flat sentence, and the Duke would not so much as change colour. He had spent 6 years hating what that woman made of him, and then, when it mattered, he had performed it for her like a trick pony, and the price of the performance had been the one heart in the county that had ever come to him empty-handed. He had said something short to Odalis and left his chocolate untasted and gone out, and she had watched him go with the first flicker of uncertainty he had ever seen disturb her, and he had found that he did not care for her approval or her doubt or her presence under his roof by so much as a farthing, and had not, he realized, for years. He had been guarding a door that led into an empty room. He rose, and it was as if he set something down that he had been carrying so long he had forgot the weight of it. He did not ring for his valet. He went himself along the cold corridors to the little room under the north eaves where she had worked, and it was already swept and bare. The trestle folded, the good scissors coiled in their cloth and left behind, because they were the house's and not hers, and a square of paper pinned to the shutter where she had mended, in the last hour, a rent in the old nursery hanging that no one had asked her to mend. Mended it small and even and invisible. The way she had told him on the terrace, she knew the difference between a cold thing and a careful thing, because she had spent her life closing tears so that they did not show. He stood in the doorway of the empty room and looked at that neat, unbidden, unpaid for repair, and something in the Duke of Ivermore that had been shut since an April morning 6 years gone came open all at once and did not close again. He took the stairs 2 at a time, which no one in the house had seen him do since he was a boy, and came out into the stable-yard bareheaded, and there was the trap already harnessed and coachman Rock up on the box, and the small figure beside it in the grey travelling cloak, handing up a bundle no bigger than a loaf. Marisol. She turned. She had schooled her face, and it was a good schooling, and it held for perhaps a breath before it did not, and he saw in the moment before she mustered it again exactly how much he had cost her, and it undid the last of him. "Your Grace," she said. "Level. Only a little rough at the edge. The trap is only to the turnpike. I have troubled the house enough. You have troubled nothing." He came across the frozen cobbles without his coat, without his hat, without any of the arrangement a duke is supposed to bring out of doors with him. And he stopped before her close enough that Rourke on the box very carefully found something to study on the far horizon. "Rourke, take the trap in. Miss Cardigan is not leaving this hour." "I am leaving this hour," she said. "Then you will leave having heard me, and if after you have heard me you still wish to walk to the turnpike, I will carry your bundle to it myself and not say another word." He heard his own voice shake and did not try to stop it shaking. "I have never asked you for anything. I am asking now. A quarter of an hour. In the cold, if you like it better. I have earned the cold." She looked at him a long moment, and then she looked at Rourke and said quietly, "Take it in, Mr. Rourke." "Thank you." And the trap rattled away over the cobbles and left the two of them standing in the empty yard with the wind coming thin off the moor, and the whole great house at their backs with, he did not doubt, a face at every servant's window, and he found he did not care for the faces at all. "I stood in my own gallery," he said, "and I called you nothing. You heard me. I know you heard me. I have not had a clear hour since." He did not reach for her. He kept his hands at his sides where she could see them, because he had learned from her on the terrace that a man ought not answer with his hands the questions he has not the courage to ask with his mouth. I told myself I did it to protect your place. That was a lie. I did it to protect myself. There was a woman once who taught me that to want a person was to be robbed by them, and I made a fortress of that lesson, and I have lived in it 6 years and called it dignity. And it is not dignity, Marisol. It is fear wearing a good coat. And you saw straight through the coat the first hour you were in my house, you, who fell asleep in my chair by mistake and woke and did not flatter me and did not cower, and told me the fire wanted mending. I have been mending the wrong things my whole life. I mended my pride. I let everything else go to rags. Her eyes had filled, but she did not let them fall. He thought he had never seen anything braver than the way she stood there and would not let them fall. You called me a poultice, he went on lower, on the terrace. You said you would not be the cure for what that lady did to me, that I was so glad to find a woman who did not want the coronet that I had not asked whether she might want the man, and that those were not the same. You were right. You were right in all of it, and I heard it. And then 3 days later I was so frightened by how right you were that I stood up in front of my own people and unsaid you. I made you a mender of drapes. I did the very thing, do you see it? I did the very thing she did to me. I looked at a whole person and I took the one part of you that was convenient to me and I called it the whole. She looked at me and saw lands. I looked at you and saw safety. A woman who could not hurt me because she wanted nothing. That is not love, Marisol. That is another kind of theft. And I am ashamed to the bone, and I have come out here without my coat to tell you so, because you're the only person alive who has ever told me the truth, and I will not let you walk 11 miles believing that I think you are nothing. The wind moved the grey cloak against her. She was quiet so long that he heard the rooks going over, and a door somewhere in the house, and his own heart. Do you know, she said at last, and her voice was not steady now, and she let it not be steady, which was braver still, what it is to be the person a great man calls nothing to save his face. I have been small all my life, your grace. I have been overlooked in better houses than this one, and I learned long ago not to mind it, because to be overlooked is only to be unseen, and there is no shame in it, it is merely cold. But I did not think you overlooked me. That was my whole difficulty. I thought, fool that I am, a schoolmaster's daughter with 11 miles and a needle to her name, I thought you saw me. And so when you stood in that gallery and made me furniture, it was not being small that broke me. I had been small before. It was being seen and then unseen, by the one man I believed had eyes. She pressed the back of her hand once to her mouth and took it away. That is a great deal worse. I would rather you had never noticed me at all. I know it. He said it steadily, taking the whole of it, not flinching from any part. I know exactly which was the worse, and I chose it out of cowardice, and I would give the estate to have the hour back. I cannot have it back. I can only tell you what is true and let you do as you will with it. He drew a breath that hurt. What is true is this. You are the most holy a person of anyone I have known. You want nothing of mine, and you never have. And I understand at last that this frightened me, because it left me no way to keep you at arm's length. I could not accuse you of the one crime I had armed myself against, and so my whole fortress was of no use, and rather than let it fall I pulled it down on your head instead. I am sorry. I am more sorry than I have words that are equal to, and past the sorrow, Marisol, under it, over it, the plain thing that has been true since the morning you told me my fire wanted mending. I am in love with you, not with your usefulness, not with your safety, with you, the particular, unmistakable, unflatterable, 11 miles and a needle hole of you, who will not be a poultice and will not be a cure and will not be furniture, and who is right always, insufferably about everything, and whom I would follow to the turnpike and past it, and to your cottage door and stand outside it in the snow like the fool I have finally consented to be. She was crying now openly without hiding it, and it was not the crying of a woman who has been broken. He had seen enough of both to know the difference, as she had known the difference between the cold thing and the careful thing. You have no coat, she said foolishly, on a kind of laugh that was half a sob. No, he said. I gave it up, along with the fortress. I find I am warmer without either. He took, at last, one step, only one, and stopped, and held out his hand, palm open, offering and not taking, the way he'd held the frozen air a hair's breadth from her fingers on the terrace and not crossed it. "I will not close my hand until you put yours in it. I have learned that much from you, if nothing else. The question is yours to answer. It was always yours. I am done answering it for you out of my own gladness." And the Duke of Ivermore, bareheaded in his own cold yard with the whole house watching from its windows, stood with his hand open in the wind and waited, humbled to the ground, stripped of every wall and every reason and every careful year, laid entirely bare before a woman who owned nothing and had walked into his life by falling asleep in his chair, and did not move and did not press, and let the frozen quarter of an hour be, wholly and at last hers. She did not answer him with words. She looked at the open hand a long moment, at the bare fingers reddening in the wind, at the man who had come out of his own great house without his coat to hold it there and would, he had told her, hold it there until the cold took the feeling from it rather than close it upon her before she was ready. And then Marisol Cardigan set down her bundle upon the frozen cobbles and put her hand into his. He closed his fingers about hers as a drowning man closes his about a rope, and felt, at the first warm shock of her palm against his, something in the middle of his chest come loose that had been held in an iron cramp for 6 years, so that for one unsteady instant the Duke of Ivermore could not have spoken had the king himself required it of him. He only stood in the empty yard, with the wind coming thin off the moor and her small cold hand shut inside his own, and looked at her as though she had been given by him from the dead. "You must understand me," she said, and her voice was not the voice of a woman who has surrendered. It was level and clear, the schoolmaster's daughter voice that had emptied a whole drawing-room to silence. "I am not putting my hand in yours because you are a duke. If anything, it is in spite of it. I would have you know, your grace, before another word is said, that I want nothing of Ivermore, not the house, not the name, not the acres, not the carriage that has just gone in without me. I have wanted none of it from the first hour, and if you are looking, even now, even here, for the woman who will take the man and be content to let the rank come with him only as the weather comes with the field, then you have found her, and if you are looking for anything else at all, you had better let go of my hand, before either of us is the worse for it." "I know what you are," he said. "I have spent 3 days doing nothing else but knowing it." He tightened his hand upon hers once and did not let go. "I am not offering you Ivermore, Marisol. Ivermore is the least of me and always was. It is a cold house full of rooms I do not use, and you know that better than any soul alive, for you have dusted the half of them. I am offering you the man who owns it, who is worth a good deal less than the house by every reckoning but yours, and who has finally understood, at the age of 38, and in his shirt sleeves in his own stable yard, that he would rather be told the truth by you in a cottage at Hollowmere than be flattered into his grave by every lady in England under this roof. Take the man. The rank may stand out in the cold. I have done with letting it answer for me." She laughed then. A real laugh broke in the middle, her eyes bright and streaming and unashamed, and it was the first time in 7 years that the yard of Ivermore had heard a woman laugh in it, and he thought he would spend whatever remained of his life arranging to hear it again. "Then come indoors," she said, "before you take a chill, and I am blamed for that too." "No," he said, "not indoors. Not yet, and not by the back way, and not quietly." He drew her hand through his arm and settled it there, and looked toward the great grey front of the house where, as he had known, there was a face at every window that had a face to give it. "You came into this house by an accident, and were made small in it by design, and I will not have you go into it now by the servant's door as though there were still something in you to be hidden. There is not. There has never been anything about you that wanted hiding. Walk in at the front with me, Marisol, in the sight of everyone who watched you gather their candle ends, and let them look." And so the Duke of Ivermore walked bareheaded up the length of his own gravel with a seamstress upon his arm, unhurried, in no manner of shame. And the great door was opened for them by Barrow, who had served the house man and boy, and had never in 40 years seen his master come home like that, and who, being the elder of the 2 footmen who had stood rigid as fence-posts on the night this all began, permitted himself, as they passed, the smallest inclination of his grey head toward Miss Cardigan, which from Barrow was very nearly an embrace. The hall was not empty. Word runs through a great house faster than any master can walk its length, and Lady Honoria had heard it, and had come down, and stood at the foot of the great stair with her stick planted before her, and her sharp, short-sighted eyes fixed upon the door, and behind her, drawn by the same current and expecting, no doubt, a very different spectacle, stood Mrs. North with her mouth already arranging itself, and Odalys. Odalys Danforth had dressed to travel. The carriages were ordered. Her errand was spoiled. She had meant, he did not doubt, to depart with her chin high and her account of the visit already composing itself into something she could tell in London drawing-rooms, the cold duke, the tiresome week, the seamstress sent packing. She looked now from the duke's bare head to the plain grey figure upon his arm, and the composure that had never once failed her at last. Something behind the lovely face went flat and cold and comprehending, and she understood, before a word was spoken, that she was to be a witness and not an actor in whatever was to come. The duke did not raise his voice. He had never needed to. "Aunt," he said, "and Mrs. Danforth, Miss Danforth, I am glad you are none of you yet gone, for there is a thing I would say once, and say plainly, and I would as soon say it before witnesses so that it need never be said twice." He drew Marisol a half-step forward, not releasing her, so that she stood beside him and not behind. "This is Miss Marisol Cardogan of Hollowmere. She is the daughter of an apothecary who was a better man than I have been, and she is a seamstress, and she came up to this house by the day for a week's wages, and I have asked her to be my wife, and she has done me the very great honour, greater than I have deserved of her, or of anyone, of consenting." The silence in the hall was the silence he remembered from the drawing-room 3 nights before, the total silence that falls when the truth has been told so cleanly that nothing may stand against it. Mrs. Danforth's mouth had stopped its arranging. Odalys had gone quite white about the lips, exactly as she had gone white when Marisol answered her at the pianoforte, and had, as then, no answer, because there was none to have. "I say this to you in particular, Lady Odalys," the Duke went on, and now there was a coldness in his voice, but it was the old, feared coldness turned at last upon a thing that had earned it, "because you took a great deal of trouble, while you were my guest, to teach my household to think ill of this lady, and to teach me to think ill of myself. And in the one you succeeded better than in the other. You told me in the Yellow Saloon that a girl of no family would let herself be called a great deal worse than a lady if the prize were large enough. You were mistaken. She would not let herself be called anything at all that was not true, which is more than I can say, upon my honour, for the whole of the company that came here to be looked at. She is worth 100 of the season's beauties, and I include, without the smallest hesitation, present company. You will forgive me if I do not see you to your carriage. The road is long, and I would not delay you. It was not cruelly done for all its edge. It was only true, and the truth in Odalys Danforth's white face was a harder judgment than any cruelty could have framed. She dropped him a curtsy, a poor, stiff shadow of the plunging art she had performed for him 12 times a day for a fortnight, and gathered her skirts and went, and her mother went after her in a fluster of half-begun sentences that found nowhere to finish, and the great door closed behind the Danforths of the county. And the Duke of Ivermore did not watch them go. He was watching his aunt. Lady Honoria had said nothing through the whole of it. She stood now with both hands folded upon the head of her stick and studied the pair of them, the seamstress and the nephew. With the considering sharpness she had turned upon Marisol across the drawing-room and, later, upon the Duke himself at his own hearth, when she had set down her embroidery like a closing door, and let him know she had seen the winter in him and found it wanting. He waited for her judgment as he had not waited for any person's judgment since he was a boy, because she was the last of his blood who remembered him before the frost, and because he found, to his surprise, that he wished her to be pleased. "Well," said Lady Honoria at length. She thumped her stick once upon the marble. "I told you 3 nights since that the girl had more truth in her than a saloon full of people who possessed a great deal of it, and you looked at me as though I had lost my wits. I had not lost my wits. I have never in my life lost my wits. It is the one thing in this family that has never gone astray." She turned her short-sighted gaze upon Marisol and softened, by a degree that in Lady Honoria was a great melting. "Come here, child, and let me look at you properly, for I mean to leave you a good deal of what I have, and I should like to be sure I am leaving it to a face I can bear. Yes. You have a very pretty way of standing still, and I forgave you the lurking at the first, and I forgive you the seamstressing now, and I will tell you the truth as you told it to that odious singing girl, for I see it is the coin you deal in. I did not think he had it in him. I had begun to believe the frost had gone all the way down. I am glad past speaking to find I was wrong. Marry him quickly, before he thinks better of it, and mind you go on telling him the truth, for he has had a lifetime of the other thing and it near killed him." "I mean to my lady," said Marisol. "I do not doubt it," said Lady Honoria, and thumped her stick again, and required her nephew to give her his arm to the drawing-room and a glass of the Madeira he kept for no one, and thereby, in her brisk, unsentimental way, gave the match her blessing before the whole of the household that had crept to the edges of the hall to see how the thing would fall. And the household, when it saw how it fell, did a thing that had not been done at Ivilmore in the living memory of the oldest among them. It forgot itself, and made a small glad sound, a rustle and a murmur along the shadowed edges of the great cold hall, the sound of people who have served a frozen house a long while and find, to their astonishment, that the spring has come to it after all. The Duke heard it, and did not rebuke it. He had spent 6 years teaching them to be silent. He found he had no wish, any longer, to be served by a silence, and he let the murmur run its course, and saw Barrow at the door turn his face aside to hide what was upon it, and understood that he had frozen a great many people besides himself, and that the thaw would have to reach them all, and that he was glad of the labour of it. They were married in the spring, in the small grey church at Hollowmere and not in the great one at Ivilmore, because Marisol asked it, and because the Duke had learned to hear what she asked and to want it the moment she had asked it. It was the parish where her father had died sitting up with other men's children, and half the Low Street came in its mended best to see the apothecary's daughter wed, and the Duke of Ivilmore, who had frightened cabinet ministers, stood among the thatch and the smoke of Hollowmere and shook the hand of every fevered, grateful soul who came up to him, and remembered each name after, which he had never in his life troubled to do, and by the summer had put the physicians on notice that they would come down the Low Street when they were sent for or answer to him for it, and had built, at the foot of the park where the rents came from and the fevers came out of, a dry stone dispensary with a good fire in it and her father's name cut over the door. He was a changed man, and the county said so, and the county was for once entirely right, though it never did learn the whole of the reason. It knew only that the cold Duke had thawed, that he was seen abroad, that he answered letters, that he had opened the north rooms and filled the cold house with light, and with the coming and going of people, that he laughed, which no one under 40 had ever heard him do, and it laid the change in the way of the world, at the door of a lucky marriage, and never once suspected that the whole of it had turned upon an accident, upon a tired girl who had sat down in the warmth for one stolen moment, and been taken by sleep in the one chair in England no living soul was permitted to touch. For that was where he found her, on the first evening of their true belonging in the house, when the guests were gone and the servants abed and the two of them had the great quiet rooms to themselves at last. He had gone looking for her through the long cold corridors. He no longer minded being cold, and had come at length to the study where it had all begun, and there in the firelight, for there was a fire in that room now, and every night, by his own order, she had drawn up his mother's wing-backed chair to the hearth, and curled into it with her cheek against her wrist exactly as he had first seen her, and fallen fast asleep. He stood in the doorway a long while, as he had stood a long while over her that first night 2 hours past midnight, when the anger that was owed to him would not come, and something else had come instead. He was not, this time, at any loss to name the something else. He crossed the room quietly, and knelt at the side of the chair his mother had loved and no hand had touched in 7 years, and looked at the sleeping face that had undone every wall he had spent his ruined youth in building, and he did not wake her, and he did not move her, and it did not once cross his mind that she was where she ought not to be. She was precisely where she ought to be. She had been, he understood, from the first accidental hour. Presently she stirred and opened her eyes and found him there close beside her in the firelight, and did not startle, for she had long since learned the difference between the cold thing and the careful thing, and knew which one knelt at her side. "I fell asleep in your chair," she said drowsily, and smiled by mistake. "Again, you will have to turn me off." "It is your chair now," said the Duke of Ivermore, and took her hand from where it lay against her cheek and pressed his mouth to the reddened knuckles that no longer needed to be red, and held it there. "It was always going to be your chair. I only did not know it the first night, and spent a very great while learning what any fool might have seen at a glance, that the warmest thing that ever entered this cold house came into it in her sleep by an accident, and mended the one fire in it that had wanted mending these 6 years, which was mine." He rose and gathered her up out of the chair and into his arms as though she weighed nothing at all, and she put her head against his shoulder and let him, which from Marisol was the whole surrender of a woman who gave nothing she had not weighed. "Come to bed, my heart. The fire will keep. There is a fire in every room in this house now, and there will be as long as I am master of it, for I have been cold long enough, and so, God forgive me, have you." And the Duke of Ivermore carried the apothecary's daughter up through the warm and waking house that everyone had thought would stay frozen forever, past the great chair by the hearth where the embers glowed and held, and did not once look back at the man he had been,